This is Still Point Radio, where it's all about the sovereignty of self, super elevated levels of freedom. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, and good evening, good day, good morning, wherever you may be. This is Ryan McMahon again, bringing you another brilliant podcast where we talk about the nature of reality, truth, consciousness, centeredness, still point, the nature of the self, life in time and being. Our intent here, as usual, is to unveil reality. Keep it real. Enjoy it and share. Thank you. This is a collaboration between Reveling Reality podcasts and Still Point Radio. More information about the podcasts, how you can donate, help, share, learn more, learn books and sources and resources are all on the website revelingreality.com.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of Reveling Reality. I am your host, Tyler Walker, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Ryan McMahon.
Hello, welcome.
And Julie DeLaGarza.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, guys. This is exciting.
Yeah.
It is.
So, given this is our very first podcast, I thought it'd be appropriate to spend just a short minute or two here to let you guys know who we are and what we're all about. So as the name kind of insinuates, our goal here is to reveal a more true reality than the one that is pulled in front of us. I don't know about you guys, but at some point in my life, I had my head cracked open, if you will, and I was shown a world far stranger than what I was led to believe. And what we're trying to do here in this podcast is to show you the true world, if you will, as you'll see through coming episodes. A lot of the things we're taught as fundamental truths of our reality may not be so concrete. And that's it quite in a nutshell, but this podcast is going to cover a huge range of topics, everything from metaphysics to philosophy to hermetics and occult history and magic practice and God knows what else. This is an open range for anything, in my opinion, that is going to be revolving around the nature of consciousness and around the true nature of our reality and our place within it, as at least in my own experience, and I believe my co-hosts will back me up here. The farther you get down this rabbit hole, the weirder it all gets, and seemingly nothing is off limits. Yeah.
Yes, right on. That was a great introduction, Tyler. This is Ryan McMahon, and I am honored and happy to be a part of this podcast, Reveling Reality. And my background is pretty much into the mysticism and the philosophy side of things. So I tend to go into the abstract and try to pull things together, sort of extrapolate abstract concepts, and then somehow pin them down to reality, right? So here we are trying to define or discover or reveal or uncover what is what is reality, what is a deeper truth. And so my background is just a lot of syncretic study, a lot of research, all across the board, from science to, like I said, philosophy, mysticism. Basically, I like to really try to get my hands on any human being that I feel is a great mind. Or importantly, also a great heart. Those things need to work together, I think, to be a whole person.
Well said.
Thank you. And so basically, anytime I latch on to somebody who I think is, resonating with some sort of genius, I just jump in and see what I can learn from them. So,
thank you, Ryan. Julie, you want to tell us just a little bit about your background and what got you interested in this subject matter?
Yeah. So as a little girl, my mom and dad, raised us on tinctures and essential oils and healing and a lot of the metaphysical aspects of healing. And ever since then, it's been a big part of my life. I've become I'm a Reiki. I'm about to be a Reiki master, hopefully. I do a lot of intuitive healing. I'm just similar to Ryan and similar to you. I'm very interested in learning about why nature is so connected with us today, why nature is so connected with the human body. I come from more of a healing side of it all, the more metaphysical side of it all. So I might be considered maybe a little bit more of a hippie in this atmosphere, but I certainly am.
One way or another.
Sorry?
So we're all hippies in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys have more of like the historical context, and for me, I'm very connected with the human body, and I know that you are too, Ryan, as well, and I know Tyler, you are as well. That's just more my background is chakras and oils and energies and that kind of thing.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
Me and Ryan absolutely come from arguably a little bit more of the, I guess what you might call scholarly aspect of this work, whereas Julie's is a little bit more personal, if you will, and a little bit more hands-on and experimental and less philosophical. So I like this because it gives a really good dynamic to this group as a whole. We really kind of cover both ends of the spectrum, which is fantastic. And just to give you the briefest of backgrounds on myself as well, kind of as I already indicated, I definitely come from the more philosophical side, the more thinking aspect of this world. And I'm just an avid studier. So I, for the last 6 years or so of my life, have been avidly studying literally any and everything I can get my hands on that has to do with the subject matter contained in this podcast. Everything from quantum mechanics to Buddhism to any crazy type of metaphysics you might have come across. And it is a strange world and a very fun one, and hence why we're all here to tell you about it.
Yeah, that's right. And speaking of a strange world, it reminds me of the quote from Mark Twain that everybody sort of has heard but maybe doesn't spend the time to listen to and try to figure out. But that quote that truth is stranger than fiction. And it sort of stops right there for most people. But
well said, Ryan.
Thanks. I mean, the quote just continues on and goes, truth is stranger than fiction. But, and as Mark Twain says, the reason why is because fiction is limited to possibilities, and truth is not.
Ooh, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I've sat with that quote and went like, what? I mean, what is Mark Twain trying to tell?
No,
us,
I love the way you're bringing that up initially, just because, and again, I'm sure you all can testify to this. The things that are contained in this world, the world that we're going to be discussing throughout this podcast, you couldn't write if you tried. This is better and crazier and more loony and more profound than any fictional piece you have ever read or will ever come across. Truth is absolutely stranger than fiction.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, guys. So without further ado, I think it's time to jump on into our initial topic here for our very first episode. Woohoo, guys.
Yeah.
I think for the first episode, what's going to be fantastic, given the nature of this podcast, is trying to reveal a more true reality. I think a great topic to start off is the seeming reality around us. If we can look at things that we fundamentally hold true and dissect them and realize that maybe the truth is stranger than it appears, we can start questioning the larger picture and get into the intricacies that this podcast will inevitably fall into. And to do so, I want to start discussing matter. Matter as in the solid, or at least seemingly solid, objects that take up our everyday space in this 3D reality that we all inhabit. And one of the instrumental pieces of knowledge that I've come across in my my studying here, and that has without a doubt changed my worldview, is the composition of an atom. Because we're all taught in school, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know what school you went to if not, but we're all taught in school at some point that the nature of our reality is made up of these little things called atoms. Now, most of us stop there. And I don't know about you guys, but when I first heard that in school, I definitely didn't question it and didn't think, I wonder what atoms are made up of then. That's the fundamental building block of reality.
That's a good point.
Why else would I think otherwise? And it's even crazier when you look at the etymology of the word atom, and forgive me because I'm not familiar with the Latin root of it, but I believe it actually is derived from the concept of the universal building block. The word atom actually is meant to encapsulate that this is the fundamental piece that our reality is comprised of. And we know now, thanks to things like quantum mechanics and the Large Hadron Collider and all that, that there are things within atoms, and it isn't this fundamental block that we thought it was. And that's weird enough as it is, but hold on, because it's about to get a whole lot weirder.
Yeah, if I can step in here.
Absolutely.
Etymologically, there's a lot of levels. Since we're talking about truth and reality, there's a lot of levels to the meaning of a symbol or a word. And, esoterically, atom is what the Egyptians would call Atum, which is really just represented by the sun. So that's a very esoteric thing that a scientist would be like, well, what does that have to do with
certainly
quantum physics? But they used the sun because it's the ultimate symbol of holistic, or a holistic view of reality, or your own personal universe. And so an atom in scientific terms, or in Latin terms, in Western terminology, it means non-splittable. It means indivisible. So again, you could see the scientific language just saying, this is what we think is a whole. It's not splittable. It can't be divided. So it's obviously whole. So you can link those two philosophies together, even though one is extremely esoteric and then the other is, sort of rooted in what we would call that scientific, intellectual, pin it down type of approach.
Yeah, no, well said. And that's what I was trying to think of, but couldn't. So thank you for doing that for me.
Absolutely.
Ryan, how is that spelled? Atum.
It's Atum.
TU. Okay.
Yeah, and they also, if you look at Egypt and you look at certain dynasties, right around King Tut, actually I think it was just before him, like 17th or 18th dynasty, they also took that word that was Atum, and the pharaoh Akhenaten.
I was just going to go there.
He adopted it and said it's Aton, and this is why his name is Akhenaten. It's the Aton. And it's really the exact same principle. It's only just unique to his particular, sort of, I guess you could say, sort of family's altar worship. It's the same exact principle.
What's really interesting about Akhenaten, too, and thank you for bringing him up, because that guy we could write books about, and I'm sure they have been written. Yeah. He, and just to kind of synthesize what Ryan is saying here as being the indivisible, or the kind of one, the reason Akhenaten adopted, that was not his original name. I forget what it is off the top of my head, forgive me, but that was not his original name. And during his kingship, his rulership over Egypt, he changed it to Akhenaten because he was the first and only Egyptian ruler to change Egypt from a pantheistic religion, having more than one or multiple gods, to a monotheistic. And he was the one that said, look, all these different gods that you all worship are actually different, if you will, archetypes or manifestations of the one true God. And he took that as the sun. And goddamn, are we going to get into that in future episodes? But I just wanted to add that in because I find that really fascinating, and to kind of, again, synthesize what Ryan was saying.
Great.
Yay.
Yeah, Egypt is... obviously this is our first podcast. We can take it down so many different avenues. But Egypt in so many ways has embodied these universal cosmic principles.
Absolutely.
And that's why their civilization is still impacting ours today. With our, we walk around with cell phones and radio towers and satellites, but a lot of people in the Western world just don't really pay homage, or maybe unaware that we're deeply rooted in Egyptian theology, philosophy,
Absolutely.
Cosmology.
Look at still just the wonder that surrounds the pyramids. For how technologically advanced we are as a civilization. You can argue all day that because we have an iPhone in our pocket, we're at the pinnacle of human innovation,
Exactly.
but we still couldn't, with all the technology that we have at our disposal, recreate what the pyramids are. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's an astonishing engineering feat, and one that still evades us. So it really goes against the paradigm of, if you will, Darwinian evolution and this very steady increase in human intelligence. And don't worry, because we're definitely getting into that in future episodes. And it's hard for me even to stop talking about it now. But what I did want to hit on is, again, this notion of matter, this notion that our physical reality is, in fact, physical. But let's refer back to that atom and let's ask what our physical nature is comprised of, knowing that it was initially taught that this indivisible piece called an atom was the fundamental component. We know now, thanks to quantum mechanics in the late 18th, early 1900s, that that's not necessarily the case any longer. So before we even get into things like subatomic particles and all that, and as a disclaimer, I am no scientist by any means necessary.
None
I just
of
like
us
to
are.
research a lot of that. So as a very quick disclaimer, and I'm sure this goes for my co-hosts as well, please do not take anything we say as fact. We simply are here to inspire you, hopefully. So by all means, if you find something we say interesting or if you question the legitimacy of it, I urge you to jump online or into a book and find out for yourself. Please do not take our words as gospel. That is not our intention. But let's take a look at that atom, which we know comprises all of our material reality, and ask ourselves, what is an atom? So I don't know about you guys, but when I hear that word, I am immediately in my head shown that kind of 7th grade, if you will, science textbook photo of an atom made popular, I believe, by David Bohm, famed physicist, awesome guy.
Brilliant guy.
Absolutely.
David Bohm.
But we see that little kind of cluster in the middle, the nucleus is what we used to call it, and we see the kind of flying electrons out around the outside. Kind of looks like that Genius Bar logo at the Apple stores, for any of you who've gone into there.
Oh, yeah.
And
Only because of you, yes.
I used to work at Apple, just as a heads up. That's why she's saying that. Fun place. Go. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I don't know if you want to chime in or not, but I just recently, if I can step in there.
You bet.
I just recently have been diving deep into Walter Russell and Russellian science. And, I mean, it's a massive topic, but he addresses quantum physics and the atomic particle in such a way that I just made a video myself, just basically a short call out to all scientists.
Which, pardon me to interrupt, will be available and linked to on revelingreality.org.
Oh, right on. So, basically I'm on board with Walter Russell, and at first I was like, what is this? This is so foreign to my my academic upbringing and my the photograph of that atom that you see in a book, But one of the things that he puts forth that is so fundamental that I urge people to study him is he just says there's no such thing as a nucleus.
Well said.
And so then everybody asks themselves, well, what does he mean? What is he talking about? How does he rectify this situation? And he's pretty brilliant if you can track with him and follow him.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, just because for most of us, and I don't know about you guys again, but for me, if you rewind my clock 5 years, I didn't even know there was an alternative to what an atom looked like or was comprised of. I fully was hook, line, and sinker bought into the idea that is unarguably the makeup of our reality. And it was only after reading some quite interesting and, again, esoteric books that I had to ask myself, is that really what's happening? I had never even thought that another possibility was even potentially existent beforehand.
And then someone chose to reveal reality. That's why you're here. That's why your rabbit hole has led you here, right?
Insert the dunch. I'm gonna get a little mini drum kit just for that. It's a really interesting thing, and for me, one of the most bewildering realizations I had as far as the composition of an atom, again, as I kind of alluded to already, came from quantum mechanics and at least scientific experimentation that's been done only in the last 150 years or so. This is a very new science for the most part. And one of the absolutely most bewildering things that I've come to understand about the atomic structure is when you look at that, again, that kind of textbook photo, that Genius Bar icon, if you will, it gives us a false understanding of scale. we see that big nucleus in the center, and those electrons, or what's now termed the electron cloud, isn't too terribly far away from it. And what I only found out a couple of years ago is that that is absolutely not what's really going on, and that's not to scale by even the largest stretches of imagination. Because what's really astonishing to me is if you do put it to scale, what you realize is that those little balls we call subatomic particles, like protons, neutrons, and electrons we all learned about in school, they make up less than 0.00001% of the space that we call an atom.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
the first time I heard that, I had to really think about that one a whole lot.
And so, I mean, doesn't that sort of reflect what our natural world must be on a larger scale, or even our cosmic world?
I would agree. I would.
So, okay, you're not talking to someone who's super affluent in science here. So, what does that mean? 0.00001.
Great question. So, let me put it this way. We think, like, for instance, I'm sitting in a chair at this moment, right? Okay. You're sitting on a bed because we're in a bedroom because this is our first podcast and we don't have a 6-digit budget yet. But we're all, I guarantee you, especially if you're listening to this right now, interacting with something physical. And you can hit that, like I'll hit my table right now. I hit that, my hand doesn't go through it. And it gives me, Tyler, an understanding that solidity exists. If it was, as I just said, 99.99999% empty space, you would think, in principle, my hand would go right through it because it's made up of almost nothing, essentially. But it doesn't. It's solid, and it appears solid to us, which seems contradictory, but is not. Because what's really happening, again, think back to that David Bohm model of the atom, is you see those electrons, or what we call electrons, zipping and buzzing around the outside. And if you recall from science class, those have a negative charge versus the proton's positive charge and the neutron's neutral charge, as the name kind of indicates there. And if you've ever played with magnets, and I know I damn sure have, I love magnets. I was so fascinated with those as a kid.
Me too, yeah.
You know, when you take two similar poles, you take a negative pole and a negative pole, as the electron clouds are, and you try and get them near one another, they repel. They don't ever touch, and you can't really get them to touch without an extreme amount of force. And that's essentially what's giving us the appearance of solidity, is even though that these atoms that make up this chair I'm sitting on are overwhelmingly nothing but what we call empty space. And I don't mean space like outer space, because we know that that's filled with particles and oxygen and actually not too much oxygen, but hydrogen and a bunch of other molecules. There's stuff in space. It looks empty, but it's rich with molecules. The inside of an atom, what I'm referring to, is not that. It is a vacuum. It is empty space in the truest sense of that word.
Yeah, and if I can chime in here,
please.
Again, Walter Russell would say that that this model of a nucleus, or let's call it a body, a body with a boundary or a shell or a cell, whatever you want to call it, is actually an illusion. And what's actually going on in the center of an atom or any other subatomic particle, or any body, actually, any physical body, is actually what he would call a place of still magnetic light. And I know those terms are like very foreign to people. They're like, you're talking esoteric stuff, but he was a scientist. And I mean, I could go into his background and show you the credibility of this man. He's
and we will at some point during this podcast. Don't worry, guys.
Yeah, I mean, he was a brilliant human being with 11 different doctorate degrees, given to him throughout his life. But the point is that he's saying that people have just, or scientists have just seen this sort of stillness in the center of an atom and decided that it must have a body or it must have a form. And Russell's saying, no, it doesn't have a form. And it's that formless or stillness, what you said, which was like a vacuum, is actually birthing all manifestation or all motion that we are able to see and perceive.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Check out Walter Russell if you guys haven't already. I mean, don't worry, we're definitely going to have more podcasts with him as a topic, or at least mentioned. dozens, if not hundreds of times throughout the life of this podcast, but I urge you guys to go check him out. He's got some very interesting work.
Yeah, I'll just spit out there. There's two main books. I mean, he's got quite a few, but one's called The New Concept of the Universe, which breaks down this sort of thing in much more, average person, layman terms.
Digestible.
Yeah, digestible. And then the other one, which is not that way, but is just an incredible feat of genius, is called Atomic Suicide. And he actually addresses exactly what we're talking about. He goes into every single step or formation of what quantum physics or the atom or particles actually are.
Yeah, I love this stuff. This is so much fun. Because again, I think I briefly mentioned this in the intro, but quantum mechanics in this world is what got me to start questioning reality, and it's led me down more rabbit holes than I knew even existed, and damn it, do they go deep. I'm still falling at breakneck speeds, and I am far away from the bottom, my friends. I just happen to be falling for a little bit longer than most people.
So what's that say about reality?
That is a fantastic question. Thank you, Ryan. I would argue that it says that our reality is an entirely different thing than we've come to think, or at least acknowledge.
Yeah, I would agree.
And again, that is a big part of what we're trying to do with this podcast, is make you think and try to get you to question your fundamental understandings of reality. Because a lot of us, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, guys, a lot of us have a worldview that was fed to us. I know I had it, and it's only in this last 6 years or so that I've been attempting to rebuild it. But most of what we think and understand as our fundamental understanding of the world was not our own unique thought, but something that was either told or taught to us throughout time, whether it be from a loved one like a parent or sibling, whether it be from the indoctrination of the school system, whether it be from an internet article you read. But I would argue a very small percentage of your fundamental worldview is your own. A lot of this, again, was just given to us, especially at an early age where we don't have the sensibility to ask the why or the questions behind it. So we just take it at its value, because why would anyone lie to us? Why would our parents tell us something that isn't true? Why would our teachers do that? And the answer, for the most part, is they don't know any better themselves, because they were handed it the exact same way.
Oh, snap.
Boom.
And, I wanted to touch on something. I was just going to say the exact same thing, Tyler, is that a lot of what we're talking about, we've said the words new concepts, and, to remind the people that are listening, these are concepts that have been around for a very long time and that are being rediscovered by humanity.
Absolutely.
Rather than, so just to clarify, because I think all different kinds of people hopefully will be listening to this, someone that is very versed in this, and then someone that's very new. So someone that's very new, I would say these are bodies of knowledge. These are taken from civilizations that are beyond what we consider ancient. And what we consider ancient is, even with what we've learned, blowing our minds.
Oh, absolutely.
The word ancient didn't even mean the same to me, even from last week. I learned something last week, and I heard this number, and I was like, I can't even digest.
Graham Hancock.
Yeah, exactly. I can't digest that concept.
Magicians of the Gods, available now on Amazon.
Yeah, and it was that, and it was that, and it was also I was listening to this amazing Gaia interview. It was fantastic. And
Gaia is a streaming website, just for those of you who don't know what it is. It's very similar to Netflix, but it has very kind of spiritual and esoteric shows and movies rather than Netflix. Yeah,
it's fantastic. So anyways, I just want to make that point, and I feel like I'm kind of that voice with the three of us that's kind of like, can we connect that to someone that's new? So the novice side is really important, and that's why I just wanted to point out these are rediscovered by humanity.
Absolutely.
These were being lived every day and in a much more advanced society to what we've known.
And again, we will give you evidence in future episodes. Yeah. As much as I'd love to squeeze it all in right now, we just don't have the time.
Yeah. So essentially, just to wrap that up, it's just we're realizing we're not as cutting edge as we think we are.
Yeah. And I mean, I just point to that. I think you're absolutely right. And I just always go back to that quote from Socrates where he says that, none of us are really learning. We're just remembering. Yeah. And so it does point to...
Ram Dass would like that.
Yeah. It points to these ancient roots that are always and probably always have been here, a part of the human existence, and we just have forgotten a lot.
No, absolutely. It was something that's been just eating away at the internal contents of my brain for the last 2 or 3 weeks is the term, there's nothing new under the sun. And you hear that, and I don't know about you, but the first time I heard that, I initially was like, okay, that's just bullshit. We have iPhones. Fucking 2,000 years ago, they did not have iPhones.
Right.
I don't know about you. That's new. No, not really.
I find that to be so liberating, though, because I feel like we've built so much of our way of making it in the world and being new and different. And it's like, I got to be different. I got to set myself apart. So when I hear that, and I read the more and more deep history that you guys are teaching me and that I'm learning on my own, I feel relieved. I'm like, oh, so I don't have to come up with the wheel again? That's nice. Right. This has already been done 18 times over. What a relief.
Yeah, you know, when I hear that, I cannot help, because I'm a music lover, I cannot help, I don't know if you guys have ever heard Bunny Wailer's album, I think it was put out in 1976, the year I was born, called Blackheart Man.
No, I haven't heard it.
And he just sings in such beautiful, sort of prophetic, yet poetic, yet very esoteric, yet very relevant terms. And he says, in one of those lines, he says, there's nothing new under the sun, and all has been here since time begun. With all the years we've spent only changing names to protect the innocent.
Oh, wow. Is that not like
every time I hear that phrase, I'm like, yeah, Bunny, that's right.
Wow. That's like a summation of everything we're learning.
That's pretty well put,
great.
to say the least.
Very
It's
cool.
Irie at the least.
That's cool.
So, wow, great shares, guys. And don't worry. Again, we'll get deeper into these topics, and I definitely want to do at least an entire episode on Graham Hancock's, and with the help of Randall Carlson's hypothesis of an ancient culture and the cataclysm of 12,000 years ago. And
did you see that interview, that Joe Rogan interview?
Oh, you bet. That's so good.
With Carlson and him together.
Yeah, if you guys haven't listened to this yet, go, I'm not kidding you. As much as I want you to keep listening to this podcast, pause it. Go download one of the most recent episodes, assuming you're listening to this close to when it came out, which is the early part of December 2015. Go to the Joe Rogan Experience podcast and find it's in the early 700s of his episodes. It's an episode with Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock. And if you can listen to that and not have your brain just ooze out of your ears at the end of the day, I don't think you listened to it. So don't worry, we'll cover that topic, because there's innumerable things to be said.
And I think that's a scientific thing that happens. Your brain actually oozes out of your head. I think that's
right.
Yeah, I've had to scoop mine up.
That's
a
a side
couple of times.
effect.
You'll grow to love that feeling, might I add. If I go to bed at night without feeling like my brain imploded on itself, I don't think I did my job.
Good point.
Absolutely.
It's always good to stretch your knowledge base, right, guys? Knowledge is power. You can't see me, but I just made like a punching motion. It was sweet. No, but I want to just real quickly just get back to what we were talking about atoms and the fact that they're 99.9999999 empty space, and true empty space again at that. I've told this to some of my friends, and the reason I wanted to bring it back up is a lot of them say, okay, well, that might be the case, but there's forces at work. We know about the 4 fundamental forces through physics: strong and weak nuclear force, and then electromagnetism and gravity. And you could argue that, okay, between those 4 forces and the 0.00001% that's left over of matter, that you could still argue that something physical is there, right? Well, not anymore. You can thank quantum mechanics for that and the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. Because what we have found out, and we take these subatomic particles, which again, we didn't even know that protons, neutrons, and electrons existed until a couple hundred years ago. We found out if you take those and smash them into one another at extremely high speeds, I believe that the LHC runs something like 97% of the speed of light, if my memory serves me, something extreme
like
to that effect. When you smash them into one another at that speed, there's more things inside.
And what does that tell you about reality?
Yeah, your physical reality isn't quite as physical as you once thought. Let me tell you now.
So how do we break that down? If for people out there are listening and they're like, yeah, I've heard all this before. I've heard this argument. I've heard this. Yeah, an atom is mostly empty space. But I think what people want to know is, what is it? Are you offering any kind of like cutting edge, approaches that point at some sort of solution? Like, what is the atom?
I have a hypothesis, and again, most of this information isn't my own. I was not the sole originator of this info. I just happen to be a scholar and like regurgitating some very interesting things that I've read. But my understanding then is, and this gets back to some really fun, in my opinion anyway, some very fun concepts in the quantum mechanic world, is you get into these seemingly paradoxical reasons as to why physical reality exists. And there's a lot of, how do I put it, controversy, I suppose, surrounding this idea. But if you look at things like the popular wave-particle duality or the double slit experiment that happened, I have come to understand, and you can argue yourself either way. Again, please don't take my word as gospel. Go check this stuff out online. It's utterly fascinating, in my opinion. Actually, let me ask Julie, do you know wave-particle duality or the double slit experience?
I know about wave-particle duality. I couldn't sit here and like teach.
Sure. Well, let's do a real brief rundown then, just for the listener's sake, if you're not familiar with the subject here. So this experiment was done, if my memory serves me, in the early 1900s, and it has been independently verified hundreds of times over. So we know that this is happening at the smallest iterations of our reality. Essentially what they did is they took, for lack of a better term, a gun, and they shot subatomic particles at a wall. And that wall had two slits in it. Vertical slits, just like you might cut a vertical line in paper. And what they did is they shot these particles through this pane, this wall that has these two slits in it, and behind that pane was another wall that was solid that had a recording instrument on it that would tell you after the subatomic particle was shot where it landed on the backboard, if you will. Mm-hmm. And now the interesting thing here, because initially that doesn't sound very interesting, but what really makes it astonishing is that when they were shooting these particles one at a time, they were actually getting, rather than what you would expect if you were shooting, say, paintballs through these double slits, you would expect to see kind of a mirror image of those two slits on the wall recording behind it. It goes through the hole and it hits, and it's going to kind of echo the shape that it went through. And you would expect to see that. What they did see, in fact, however, was not that, but rather what is indicative of a waveform. So these particles, as they were shooting them through these slits, rather than acting like the particles we are assuming they are, they were actually behaving as a wave. And they had what was called again, if my memory serves me, a refraction pattern that was indicative of a wave. So they were puzzled and scratching their head and saying, okay, we're shooting one particle. How are we seeing the recording instrument picking it up at more than one location? And not even just that, but in the fact that it looked like a wave form rather than a single particle. So what they did is they took another measuring device, an instrument, and put it at the point of the two slits to record, okay, how is this particle passing through this as a wave? And the crazy thing, this is where it gets really fun, is once they had that recording instrument, that second one up, it was behaving as they thought. It was behaving as a particle, and it was, rather than showing that wave pattern on the recording instrument in the back, it was showing the two slits. And that left physicists just puzzled, because how is this single subatomic particle unit behaving as both a solid and as a wave simultaneously, with the variable that's changing it being the recording instrument? And this is where the controversy comes, is a lot of people, myself included, have taken this to think that consciousness or some type of measuring device, and I would argue consciousness is a measuring tool, the simple addition or subtraction of a measuring unit, consciousness or otherwise, or mechanical, affects perceived reality. There is a distinct and noticeable shift between what you see based on if you're looking at it or not.
Yeah, that's the attention.
Yeah.
Your attention's actually affecting your reality.
I was just listening to The Divine Matrix by Greg Braden. Have you guys read that book?
No, I haven't read it, but I do know him.
Yeah.
I've read Fractal Time, but not that book.
Okay. Yeah. So he talks exactly about that, how once the eye sets a gaze upon an element, an atom, any kind of nature, that it will actually be interacting with it just by looking at it.
Because again, our eyes are nothing more than photon measurement units.
Sure.
Yeah, and if I can step in here, there's
Please.
that implication is talk about revealing reality. I mean, that's a huge implication if that's actually true, and I do believe it is true. It puts a lot of actually all of the awareness of each individual human being back into the center of them, their own selves.
Absolutely.
It puts accountability back on the gaze of the person.
It's got some far-reaching implications.
And then you can take that to even some fun places. Like, I know it's happened to me thousands of times in my life, where you're sitting and you get the feeling that someone's looking at you. And
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Someone what? And you turn around and sure enough.
Yep.
Yeah, and also, just for the listeners out there, this is kind of a hard concept, but what's happening with the light and the double slit experiment is this idea that a particle is actually giving birth or regenerating itself. And so there's science out there that would show that that light actually is not moving. It's
I've heard of that.
It's actually birthing itself at 186,000 miles per second, and that process is what we would call
the speed of light, for those of you who aren't familiar with that number.
Yeah, correct. The speed of light. So that process of birthing or regeneration of a round body or a particle body is what gives birth to itself over and over and over and over again. And as each new sort of cell gets spit out from the one before, it undulates upward and downward. And that upward and downward undulation, when you perceive it as an observer, it undulates in a waveform, a sine wave. And that's why
that's really interesting. I have a book I'd like to show you. I don't know if you're familiar with it yet. It's a really, really strange and hard to find book by a guy named Michael Phillips, I believe. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
But he has something in there, and he's referring to, and it might even have been brought up by Blavatsky at some point, if my memory serves me as well. But the book discusses something referred to as the UPA, or the universal physical atom, which again, it means atom in that original way we were talking about as the indivisible piece of reality. Mm-hmm. And I just find it interesting because I've never heard anyone else talk about that other than this guy, Michael Phillips, British guy. And he talks about that exact thing, that it's this unique point that's undulating up and down, and it's that motion that gives it this apparent physicality.
We can actually measure this if you just sort of pause your typical scientific intellectual approach and look at the way the universe has somehow encoded direction. So we know that there's always an up, and there's always a down, and there's always sort of an east-west or a left-right. And all bodies, all forms, whether they be spinning or orbiting or rotating, they all sort of are subject to this law, this cosmic law that the north is always up and the south is always down. And
interesting.
And so that actually translates onto the subatomic level of particles, because when a particle regenerates itself or splits itself or gives birth to itself, it's being pulled along the equatorial plane, which would be like east-west. At the same time, it's being pulled at the solstitial plane, which would be like north-south. And if you can imagine this, if you can just sort of use your imagination to imagine this, it's if I took like a foam Nerf ball, like a clown's nose, and I pulled it in opposite directions on the east-west line, and then at the same time pulled it in opposite directions on the north-south line, you'd see that this ball gets stretched in these four directions simultaneously, and it creates a torsion spiral in that ball. It creates what we would call the lemniscate, which is the infinity symbol. And this is why this symbol is so ancient, and it does mean this. And it's the same thing that all solar bodies do when they travel along an elliptical. They make a circle, right, that comes back to itself. But if you look at it on an equatorial plane, that circle is not like perfectly flat like a pancake. It like rises and then undulates and falls. And if you look at that exact symbol,
the great sine wave of the universe.
Yeah, the infinity symbol is really you have to think of it as a 4-dimensional, symbol. Not
so well put. Thank you.
Not a 2-dimensional drawing,
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening to particles as they are being birthed or split. They create new ones, but they do it through this wave form. And the reason why that waveform exists is somehow encoded into the universe. The universe decided, hey, we're going to orientate everything that's floating around here with a top and a bottom.
Yeah. That's where you get into some really fun things too. Like, for instance, the concept of phi, or the real world manifestation of it being the Fibonacci sequence, and it being this kind of organic, outward spiraling sine wave, essentially, that could at least offers an explanation for the pattern in which this sine wave operates. And don't worry, we will get far deeper into phi and Fibonacci and all that, because it's so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody on planet Earth, if you don't know what phi is, you're way behind.
Yeah,
like, it's time to open up a book and study Fibonacci and get yourself orientated.
So just because Ryan
that
said that, let's just take 2 seconds here and explain what it is, because it's one of my favorite concepts in the world. Phi was originally referred to as the sacred cut, or the golden cut, or the golden ratio. There's 1,000 different names for it, but all it is it's a proportion. It's a ratio. And what it is, if you were to put it on paper, is if you draw a straight line, the golden cut, or the phi ratio cut, would be a cut in which the small piece is to the big piece as the big piece is to the whole. It's really that simple. It comes out mathematically to about 1.6180, I think 337, I want to say.
Yeah.
But 1.618 is the rounded number we typically refer to. It's very similar, and it's arguably like a cousin to pi, which I know you all studied in school, the ratio of a circle's radius to its circumference, if my memory serves me.
Yeah.
And we know from, again, schooling, that pi as well as phi, they are what's referred to as irrational, because they are an infinite non-repeating decimal. And because of that, they are called transcendental numbers. And that's where you start to bring some fun religious connotation in.
Well, that's actually really interesting that it's called an irrational number, because if it happens to be these are the most common, building blocks in nature, and the most common numbers that we see, then wouldn't that sort of say that what we consider to be reality might be quite irrational?
Oh, so good. And just to take it, because Ryan hit on a great point, which is that we see phi manifested everywhere. And I'll give you a really easy example right now. Go ahead and look down at your hand and look at your middle finger and see the knuckle on your middle finger. That is actually, and granted, all these are approximations, because anything taken into the material reality cannot completely embody, if you will, the God form of it, which is kind of goes back to Plato's world of forms theory. But if you look at your knuckle, your first knuckle closest to your fingernail on your finger, and you look at the ratio to that knuckle to the next knuckle down, your middle knuckle, that first knuckle is at the point of phi. And then if you look at your middle knuckle and its relationship to the whole of the finger, that's also phi. And then if you look at the whole finger in relationship to the length of the hand, that's also roughly phi. It is not only a part of our makeup as human beings, we are absolutely embodied in phi, and that goes back to Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. That is one of the earliest representations of phi as it is in the human body, but it's also in things, and the common example is a nautilus shell.
Well, it's in everything.
Yeah, it is the pattern in which a lot of nature manifests. Mm-hmm. It's the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. Mm-hmm. It is,
bees in a hive.
Yeah. So many, we could go on for hours about it.
Actually, this one's a trip too.
Please.
The periodic table, with its elements, and I don't know. They keep finding new ones, but I think there's like 100 and something, 108 elements. Again, I'm praising Walter Russell, but he's the one who figured out that the periodic table is actually arranged. It sounds funny, but in a harmonic.
Oh, I totally believe it.
And if you if you arrange those elements according to a geometry, lo and behold, that harmonic geometry is phi.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, so it's a spiral. It just keeps going on and on and on.
And again, Oh, sorry. Go
On
ahead,
that
Julie.
same note, I actually just found this really cool diagram of a nautilus shell with actual harmonic notes.
Yeah.
So there's notes that actually
I saw that.
connect to color.
Oh yeah.
And the color.
And this is where you get into fractals and
Yeah, and the reason I bring up color and sound is that obviously we know within the color spectrum and the vibrational spectrum that they can resonate to similar translatable frequencies. And when you compare that to what Tyler and Ryan are talking about, which is phi, that within that nautilus shell in those frequencies, and I'm not explaining it well. We should post this on the website.
You are. No, you are.
No, yeah,
Okay.
we'll post this on revelingreality.org
website,
under the RR report, excuse me.
Great. No, within each of these like spines almost, when you go around this like kind of spiral ladder of the nautilus shell, it shows a different frequency, a different note, a different color. And it just blows your mind because you realize that you're a part of this matrix. Like as a human being that's conscious on this planet, everything that you guys are talking about that's really deep and it's really just juicy and full of logic and knowledge, it's part of you pouring a cup of coffee in the morning. It's a part of you walking out to your car and turning it on, and the way your eyes work and the way emotions work and the way conversations, everything. You're a living, breathing part of that phi ratio matrix.
Absolutely.
So as cool as it is to learn about it in a book and all of that, it's like we are all participants in that.
Yeah, and I think that that's a major point as to even why the three of us are here talking about this and revealing reality in deeper ways. And from my unpacking, just my personal vantage, I'm just so into syncretic thought, and I keep saying that. And this is the same thing as sort of like Renaissance thinking. It's being able to understand and see the links between color, between number, between music, between notes, between math, between architecture, between planets, between your body, between, basically it's just, if you do become aware of, like you're saying, how your morning cup of coffee is embodying phi, and then how you yourself are embodying phi, and then how the matrix that you're living in, the nature matrix, is built on phi. I think that it really opens up your your assemblage point or your view of reality in a holistic way. And
Absolutely.
True.
That for me, that's it. It's like my mind keeps getting blown by all different kinds of things, and every time I feel inspiration, it's always through some sort of wholeness. I get some sort of wholeness in my view of reality.
And to your point, and to Tyler, what you originally were bringing up, which was phi, and the presence of this.
So much for a quick blip in the sound.
I think that what I find is so amazing is that what we call presence is exactly what this is. So when you talk about, when you find that wholeness, and when you realize what all of this is, like that, I don't want to bring movies up right this second, but
No,
I just
go ahead.
can't. The Matrix,
Absolutely.
when Neo
We're
gets
getting
to
into that episode already?
Well, no, we're going to get there later, but I'm just bringing that up now because people that have seen it, I know so many people have seen that movie. At the very end, like he's searching for self and he's searching for his meaning and what is it all. And then all of a sudden at the end, and just this is metaphorical. We don't have to get into the actual reasoning and all the explanation behind it, but he sees these numbers and all of a sudden he gets it. And I would suggest that that's just presence. You're present in your moment, and that's what you're saying with wholeness, Ryan and Tyler. That's what you're saying.
You bring a really important point up, because as fun as all this philosophy is, and it is really fun in my opinion, it's really no good at the end of the day without practical application. And all this stuff, while it seems very external from oneself, at the end of the day, it's not. And the more you'll learn, and the more we get into this podcast with future episodes, the more you're going to see the relationship from all the things Ryan was mentioning, like math and color and sound and all these things. It's really an astonishing perspective to have, and it gives you such a different viewpoint, and to put a different way, a better and different consciousness as you go about your life.
I almost find, I totally agree with you, and I'm so excited to say this because I almost find this connection between phi and your explanation of it, which was great, into actually what we're trying to do. So we are actually a fractal within this conversation of them applying it to the bigger giant portion of their life. So we're actually describing the small, that digit of the hand, if you will. And we're just saying, hey, look at that digit. Isn't that cool? And now go out and see how many other places that little digit that we just described to you applies to in your everyday life.
I would have to agree with that. And you said the word inspire. And, you know, I'm really into etymology, and I kind of believe, actually, I know that if you really can wrap your mind around etymology, you can definitely change your consciousness in positive ways.
So true.
And so just to make it simple.
And pardon me to interrupt you, but just for those of you who don't know the term, etymology just refers to the root and kind of history of how a word is built. So you have to understand the concepts that word was built off of in order to really understand the word. Yeah, exactly. And the word inspire, which is what Julie was talking about, and what we're all talking about, this moments of epiphany. Inspire is the same root for spire or spirit, and that's also the same root for spiral. And so when we are inspired, we're basically tapping into this waveform that's already running through us and is a part of us, only we're getting out of its way. We're actually just allowing it to flow freely through our body or being or our consciousness, whatever the
dimension.
Flow state.
Yeah, it's the flow state. You know, it's when you're in the zone. And I love that feeling.
Yeah.
And, you know,
we all do.
Phi is so common because it obviously builds things all in spiral forms.
Yep.
Yep.
I love it.
I love it too. So I wanted to throw one last kind of fun concept out here that I'm sure we'll spend episodes on later before we start to wrap up, guys. And it's just to kind of bring what we're talking about back home to the aspect of how consciousness interacts with the world in which we exist. And
I love that you're bringing that up before we're wrapping up, because we can
trust
go
me, this
on
is gonna
with
be
that for about
episodes
4
later.
hours.
Well, one of the things, and I know this is really silly, but one of the things that puzzled me as a kid is that old adage of if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it?
Right.
Or does not? Excuse me. If a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make a sound. And rational logic would say, well, fuck, of course it makes a sound. It fell, the tree was there, and it would reverberate and make sound. It's just what nature does. Well, perhaps not. And again, don't worry, we'll spend an episode or two on this not too distant future. One of my favorite concepts I've come across as of late is by a guy named Tom Campbell. He is a big proponent of what's referred to as the hologram theory or holographic theory, and he is a wholehearted believer in the fact that our 3D existence is nothing more than a computerized simulation program, and I have my own thoughts on that we'll get into in another episode. But nonetheless, he has a really interesting point in how consciousness interacts with nature. And as all the old mystery schools and ancients will tell you, is that we are co-creators with our deity, whatever your particular deity happens to be. And that our consciousness is the tool we use to adapt and manifest this world. And Tom has a really interesting thought on the whole if a tree falls in the forest concept. And he says, if that tree falls, is there a sound? He says, absolutely not, because there was no tree. If you're not there, if there is no conscious recording instrument, and it doesn't need to be you physically standing there. You could set a camera up and film it. That's enough. That's enough for reality to need some type of thing to happen. In this case, the sound to be created. But if there's absolutely nothing there, nothing that a human will see or ever interact with, or for that matter, not even human, but animal, if that tree is void of any sense of conscious life and something with conscious attention, not only does the tree not make a sound, the tree never existed in the first place because reality didn't need to manifest anything there as there was no consciousness to observe it.
But that's kind of not a fair statement.
How so?
Because, you know, the whole thing is you're presuming that if a tree falls, you're already presuming that the tree exists.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's Tom's whole thing, is that there was never a tree in the first place.
Well, then
if consciousness was never there to observe it, it never existed.
Well, then you'd have to say, if there was no tree,
yeah,
then if a non-tree fell.
I love it.
You know, it's like you can't sort of have it both ways.
That kind of goes back to what you guys were originally talking about in the beginning. with observing an atom and it changing because you're observing it. It's the consciousness and the presence and the witness of something that makes you a part of it, which I just want to say, heading back to that divine matrix, I was so inspired. Ooh, inspire.
Snap.
I was so inspired by what Greg Braden said, which was that essentially when we realize that when we look at an atom or any kind of particle and it changes, and we realize that we have that kind of impact just by witnessing it, that we take away the need to be victims and to have life happen to you and to be waiting for, and this is, there's a lot of thoughts and feelings and emotions on this, but destiny, kind of waiting for things to happen to you. Whereas you're a part of this world. You showing up to something changes it. You looking at a tree in the forest possibly caused it to exist and to fall. So when you think about this in our everyday life, for me, I feel less of a victim. I feel less like life is happening to me and more like I am present with what is.
To go back to the matrix.
And my wave that I'm putting out into the world is possibly shifting, not everything, because everybody coming together creates what it is, but you feel more, I think, powerful, but also
you're definitely empowering for sure.
And also accountable, because a lot of people might feel like, oh my gosh, well, this happened to me and my life is doing this to me, opposed to, okay, well, what are you showing up for?
Right.
So not to get all emotional and
emotions
different about
it's energy and emotion. Like
yeah.
we can get emotional because we're humans, man.
Yeah.
We have to.
And if you do boil all the stuff we're talking about, it does come down to, the human spirit and the emotions.
Don't try and bend the spoon. Only realize that there is no spoon.
Yes.
Boom. All right, guys. Well, that is going to about wrap up episode 1 of Revealing Reality. I am elated if you made it this far. Good for you. Thanks so much for listening. We all tremendously appreciate it. I want to say a huge thank you to my co-hosts, Julie DeLaGarza and Ryan McMahon. You guys are amazing. Thank you for joining me here.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. This was awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
So much fun.
Nice to be a part of this. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you who are listening and putting up with our first episode and the learning curve that inevitably will come along with this type of project. So thank you all really tremendously from the bottom of all three of our hearts for giving us time out of your day to listen to our psychonautical rantings. We have a lot of fun, and I hope at the very least, if you didn't get something from this, you leave at least a little curious or a little inspired. So if you liked the show, this is going to be something that will be coming out, hopefully, and we've almost worked this out so far, but this should be a show that happens about 4 times a month. We haven't figured out which date we are going to readily publish, but expect about 4 episodes a month coming from Revealing Reality here. And if you guys did like the show, feel free, and we would be forever grateful to you to head over to revealingreality.org, and there's a donate button you will find in the sidebar. If you are courteous enough, that is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much from all of us. Of course, doing this type of work isn't free, and we appreciate any and all donations we get from the very smallest of amounts. So thank you really, really a lot for that. And if you do want to continue hearing this, you can always subscribe to Revealing Reality. We are on Stitcher. We are on iTunes. We are on BlackBerry, and hopefully some more coming in the not-too-distant future. So thank you all so much yet again, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.